All right, today we're going to unpack one of the most incredible stories in business history. We're talking about how the undisputed king of mobile phones, a company that, practically invented the cell phone for most of us, just vanished. Poof, gone. So, to really get this, let's start at the absolute peak. I mean, the top of the mountain. In 2007, look at this number. Almost half of all smartphones sold in the entire world were a Nokia. Seriously, let that sink in. Nearly 1 out of every 2 phones sold. That's a level of dominance it's hard to even wrap your head around today. And with that kind of market share, you can bet the money was just insane. At their peak, Nokia was worth over $300 billion. That made them, by far, the most valuable company in all of Europe. They weren't just a phone company, they were a global economic giant. And for their home country, Finland, they were a massive source of national pride. Which brings us to the big question, right? How on earth does a giant like that, a company that powerful, just completely fall apart in just a few short years? Well, to really understand the fall, we've got to look at how they got so big in the first place. Believe it or not, Nokia's story doesn't start with tech. It starts way back with poker and rubber boots. Seriously, they were this old-school industrial company from the 1800s. But then, in the 90s, they made this incredibly bold, all in bed. They sold off everything else to focus completely on mobile phones, something most people at the time thought was, just a silly gadget for rich people. And wow, did that bet pay off? I mean, on a scale nobody could have possibly imagined. Nokia didn't just become a big company. They became part of our culture. They literally defined what technology meant for an entire generation. I mean, look at this stuff. This isn't just a list of features, right? It's pure nostalgia. For millions of us, the word phone meant Nokia. That indestructible 3310. You could drop that thing off a building and it would be fine. And remember creating your own ringtones? Or spending hours, and I mean hours, playing Snake? In a ton of countries, you didn't even say phone, you just said Nokia. Okay, but here's where the story takes a turn. Because while the whole world saw this unbeatable empire, on the inside, things were already starting to fall apart. The warning signs were there, blinking red, but the folks in charge just didn't want to see them. And this slide, this just says it all. This gets to the absolute core of the problem. As early as 2004, years before the iPhone, Nokia's own engineers had working prototypes of touchscreen phones. They had internet tablets. They were so far ahead of the game. But what did management do? They killed the projects. Why? Because they were terrified of messing with the business that was making them so much money. The future was invented inside Nokia, and then it was killed by their own bosses. So fast forward to 2007. This fear of change, this paralysis inside the company, it left them completely vulnerable. They were a sitting duck for the huge shock that was about to hit them from the outside. And that shock was, of course, the iPhone. When Steve Jobs got on that stage, this quote pretty much sums up how Nokia's leaders reacted. They literally called it a niche product. They dismissed it like it was a toy, some expensive gimmick. They got so caught up in all the technical things the iPhone couldn't do that they were completely blind to the revolution that was happening right in front of them. And this chart really shows you their fatal mistake. If you just look at the specs, side by side, Nokia's phone, the N95, was way better. It had a superior camera, faster connection, it could do more stuff. But here's the thing they totally missed. Apple wasn't playing the same game. Nokia was competing on tech specs, Apple was competing on the experience. Nokia made a better phone, sure, but Apple made a better way to use the internet. And that misunderstanding, that single failure to see what people really wanted now, it wasn't just a small mistake. It kicked off one of the fastest, most shocking corporate freefalls you'll ever see. Just look at these numbers. It's just brutal. In 2007, they have almost 50% of the market. 6 years later, 3%. From nearly half the entire market to basically nothing. It was a terrifying freefall, as all those loyal Nokia users jumped ship for iPhones and, pretty soon, for Android phones too. By 2011, things were desperate. The new CEO, a guy named Elop, sent out this memo that became legendary. It's called the Burning Platform Memo. He basically told everyone, look, we're like a guy standing on a burning oil rig. We can either stay here and burn, or we can jump into the freezing, dark ocean below and hope for the best. So they jumped. But, oh boy, it was a catastrophic jump. He decided to abandon Nokia's own software, which actually had a lot of promise. and bet the entire company on Microsoft's Windows Phone. And you know how that went, right? The market just said nope. It was a total flop. And that big gamble, it just made them crash and burn even faster. And the final numbers are just staggering. In just 6 years, a company worth over $300 billion sold its phone business for just over $7 billion. Think about that. Almost $300 billion in value. All that history, all that innovation, it just evaporated.
So, what's the final lesson here? What really happened? The tragedy is, it wasn't about the technology. They had the tech. Their engineers were brilliant, some of the best on the planet. No, the failure was something much more human. And that's really the heart of it. Nokia wasn't killed by Apple or Google. It died from a disease inside its own walls. They got so big, so successful, that they became completely terrified of taking risks. They created this culture of fear, where bringing up a new disruptive idea was a career killer, and telling your boss bad news was just not an option. So this whole wild ride, from a paper mill in Finland to ruling the entire world and then just disappearing, it leaves us with this one really critical question. And it's not just for big companies, it's for any of us. What separates a leader from just a memory? The answer, I think, from Nokia's story is courage. It's having the courage to tear down the very thing that made you successful just so you can build something even better. It's about disrupting yourself before someone else comes along and does it for you.